subject to modification.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. On page 1, under executive session,
Yeah.
the motion was unanimous, but it was 4-0, not
4-0.
5-0. And as reflected that Ted was not present until the start of the open session. And the executive session was adjourned, not convened, at 7:20 p.m.
Yep. Thank you.
Page 2.
Under number 5, there's just an extra number 5 after
Voting
voting.
5. Well, actually, we're 5, that's funny. And page 3. Hearing no other corrections then, all those in favor of approving the minutes of September 6, 2022, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to public comment. Is there anyone in the room who has some public comment? Brian, why don't you come and introduce yourself and tell us what's on your mind?
Good evening. My name is Brian Forrest, resident of Williston, and I am a member of Sustainable Williston. And we're holding a series of meetings for the community regarding the climate, and an attempt to broaden the conversation to include more sectors of Williston in this important conversation in a more relaxed setting. It's going to be held at the Dorothy Ailing Memorial Library starting next Monday at 7. And I'd like to leave a blurb with everyone and encourage you to come as individuals and join our conversation. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Anyone on Zoom who wishes to make any public comment?
Nope, no one on Zoom, Terry.
No, okay. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
I can vote for Jeff, too, if Jeff not over. I can vote for Jeff.
So we'll move on then to Public Works Standards Exemption Request from Snyder Homes. And Eric, you'd like to bring us up to date on this? We discussed this at length at our last meeting.
Yep, to recap for the board and the public watching, Snyder Homes has submitted a request to the Select Board to consider waiving a provision in the Public Works Standard Specifications, which is a Select Board policy, related to minimum right-of-way required for new streets in its current project under review for a discretionary permit by the Development Review Board, known as the Annex, located at the former Essex Alliance Church property adjacent to Finney Crossing in town. At its last meeting on September 6th, the Select Board received an overview of the request from Snyder Homes and discussed the request with staff at the meeting. As a recap, this request would allow sections of Beaudry Lane and Chelsea Place to have a right-of-way between 50 and 60 feet, which is lower than the DPW standard of 64 feet. I left for the board this evening a draft motion prepared by the town attorney to grant this request should the board wish to consider it. Snyder Homes representatives are available this evening, but right now they have another hearing they're at in South Burlington. So should the board wish to have additional questions for them, the board may table this to later in the meeting, and I can connect with them on Zoom. Also, Planning Director Matt Belanche is available with a quick text to run next door if you have any questions for me.
Good, thank you. So are there any additional questions that need to be answered before we take this up as a motion?
No.
If not, then I would entertain the motion.
I move to grant a request by Snyder Homes for an exemption from the town's minimum right-of-way requirements for streets of 64 feet articulated in its Public Works Standard specifications for portions of roadways in the Annex residential neighborhood, which has a development application currently under consideration by the Development Review Board, as stated in a letter to the Select Board and Town Manager Eric Wells from Snyder Homes dated August 12, 2022.
Is there a second?
A second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed? Making good time here. Moving on to the Class 4 groundwater reclassification. on the Commerce Street site. And I'll ask Eric to lead us off on that. We do have guests from the Vermont DEC and I think EPA, US EPA as well.
Yep, thanks, Terry. So the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation has proposed to reclassify the Commerce Street Superfund site from a Class 3 to Class 4 groundwater. As part of this process, a public information session is scheduled this evening, right now, at the Select Board meeting. And included with the agenda, I've had the meeting notice, information fact sheet, copies of letters sent to properties within this delineated area and abutting it. And we have Kimberly Caldwell and Patricia Copolino, hopefully I said your name okay, here from Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation this evening. We may have Kevin from the EPA join us as well. I don't see him on Zoom just yet. I know there's a presentation I'll drive, and I'll turn over to our folks from DEC to brief the board and the public on this.
So please join us and introduce yourselves. And this is a public information meeting, so I'll be listening carefully, and hopefully there'll be some questions for you.
Hi, I'm Kim Caldwell. I'm the project manager for the Commerce Street Plume Superfund site in Williston, and I'm joined here by Trish Copolino. She's our senior program manager in the sites management section at DEC, but she's there for backup. She doesn't need to come up here. So thanks for having me here. I think some of you probably have heard similar presentation before, but tonight I'll give overview of the site history and status and focus on the proposed groundwater reclassification. You can move forward. And so I'll just focus on the groundwater remedy that's proposed, why groundwater is being reclassified, what it means, and what documents are available for the public to review. And also just talk a little bit more about the process. We are just collecting comments for another couple weeks. So the site history started in the early 1980s. There was an employee complaint, I believe, that originally reported an issue to the state related to a wastewater lagoon at the former MITEC facility on Commerce Street. And so that's when the state became involved, primarily looking at chromium and wastewater behind the facility. And it was later discovered that trichloroethylene, or TCE, an industrial solvent, was also present in the area in some residential wells. And it was eventually traced back to the MITEC facility. It was also reported that the facility may have dumped these solvents directly into their leach field. And the diagram there kind of shows where that facility was, kind of on the northern end of Commerce Street, and shows the leach field and lagoon. So multiple investigations were undertaken by EPA, or by the state, until EPA became involved and the site was placed on the national priorities list, or became a Superfund site in 2005. And from there, more investigation and feasibility studies led to the record of decision, which states what the remedies are for the site, and specifically for groundwater. That includes in situ remediation, placing restrictions on the site to prevent the use of groundwater, and reviewing the site every 5 years to make sure that the remedy is protective. So you can go on to the next. And so in general, this figure here, which is included in the petition for the groundwater reclassification, provides an overview of the extent of the contamination. TCE is present in a sandy aquifer, and this contamination is denser than water, so it does sink down, but there is a clay layer that's thick and continuous throughout the area that's preventing the contamination from going any deeper than this clay. It's about 30 to 40 feet below the ground surface, and that has prevented the contamination from getting into the bedrock aquifer. And because the contamination also sinks, the very top of groundwater is also clean in general. So it's really, the highest levels of contamination are generally between 20 and 40 feet below the ground surface. We have seen some reduction of concentration over the last few years, and this led us to kind of adjust our remediation strategy because we have seen this reduction. But still, without treatment, we expect this contamination to be here for likely hundreds of years, and with remediation, we're still looking at potentially decades for this contamination to be present. And so I'll point out on the figure, the yellow line shows the extent of groundwater contamination to our drinking water standards, and then the orange and red are just showing kind of the highest concentration areas. And the purple is actually a different contaminant because TCE breaks down into a different contaminant. Go on. And I'll just touch on a little bit about what's proposed to clean up the groundwater. It really is going to be targeting those areas with higher levels of contamination, and the orange and red. The grayish purple areas are actually symbolizing different geology and not contamination. But the figure shows that there's going to be a series of what we're calling biobarriers, but it's actually trenches with material placed in the ground. So when the contamination passes through those, basically like a permeable wall, it'll be treated. And so there will be a series of trenches and injection wells in the highest contamination areas. And like I said, the remedy also requires that we restrict the use of groundwater. So this design for the remediation was completed in 2019, and this year we received funding from EPA to actually go out and implement this remedy. And so one of our next steps in the next year or so will be to contract with a company to actually clean up the contamination. And so I'll just kind of reiterate why this reclassification is necessary. We want to ensure that we're protecting human health and people aren't exposed to levels of TCE that could be harmful. We expect this contamination to be here for decades. And so we want to make sure people are aware for the long term. I think everyone in the area now is pretty well aware of the issue, but we want to make sure that continues. Like I said, the record of decision requires it. And so this will notify landowners, well drillers, permitting agencies that groundwater use is restricted. And so we'll ensure that no new wells are drilled in the area. And so this process includes us providing a petition for the reclassification. So the petition document basically describes the contamination at the site, the characteristics of the contamination, the extent, and the justification for drawing the boundaries of the reclassification area. There's also a finding of fact and reclassification order, which is a shorter summary document and is actually what the Secretary of A&R signs to make that reclassification order. And we've also provided a fact sheet online for the public about this process. And then just looking back again at this extent of the plume, that's basically what we started with to determine the area that needed to be reclassified. But we added a 200-foot buffer to the plume boundaries. And so that's to ensure that not only do we not want wells to be drilled where there is contamination, we don't want wells to be drilled near the edge of the plume and then potentially allowing the contamination to spread. We also want a little bit of wiggle room, so as we monitor the site, say every 5 years. We want to ensure that that time in between the monitoring events is protective. And so there's a little bit of a buffer added. And then to ensure that we can see where those boundaries are on the ground surface, it's standard that we are using the parcel boundaries or roads or other visible features as the boundaries for the reclassification, rather than cutting through the middle of a property where you can't really tell where there's a restriction or where there's not a restriction. But parcel boundaries are pretty well defined, as well as roads. And so from the extent of the plume, this map just shows what parcels are actually proposed within that reclassification area. It's approximately 80 parcels, and the only one that is partially within and partially without of the reclass area is a property along Marshall Ave, because it's located on both sides of the road. So we're only including the northern portion of that property in the reclassification area. There is one existing bedrock well within this reclassification area. It's pretty far south of the plume at the garden center on Marshall Ave. It's been tested several times and determined to not be connected to the contaminant plume. So this reclassification order won't affect the current use of that well. It's still considered usable. But this order would prevent other wells from being drilled. And we feel that because municipal water is already available in the area, it's unlikely that people would need to drill any new wells. But again, this is an added protection. So next steps, we have about 2 weeks left in our public comment period. When we receive any comments and questions, we provide a summary and response to any comments online on our environmental notice bulletin. And then once those comments are addressed, the Secretary of A&R will issue a final decision on the order. And at that point, if it is reclassified, we would just notify everyone of the decision, including well drillers, so that they're aware. And this area also gets placed on our A&R Atlas. So if you go on our website, where you can see, for example, the locations of wells or hazardous sites, there's a layer for reclassified groundwater. And so, I don't know if you're familiar with the environmental notice bulletin. That's one way to access the documents, instructions for getting to that website. We're on all the mailings to the property owners. You can also email me, send comments by mail, or give me a call if you have any questions.
Good, thank you. Question for you, on the corner of Marshall Avenue and South Burnell Road, there's a daycare or childcare center there. Is that in the plume area?
The corner of South Burnell and Marshall
Avenue on the southwestern side.
If it's directly on the corner, it's not within the proposed reclassification area. Yeah, so that property is immediately adjoining the proposed area, so they would have gotten a notification of this happening, but they're not affected by the order.
Okay. Thank you. Back in 1984, I was working for the Department of Health, the Division of Environmental Health, when this thing broke. So it's been a long time, but looks like we're making some progress on it as well. I had a little different color hair back then. Any other questions for Tim?
It just, why, I mean, I've been we've been getting updates, I've been on the board for some time now, and we've been getting updates on this plume for a long time. Why is it only now that this is being classified, or reclassified? I thought the whole thing was reclassified earlier.
So in 2015, the record of decision said that we needed to put institutional controls in the area to restrict groundwater. But it wasn't until the last couple of years we had an agreement with EPA to actually spend our staff costs and doing this work in addition to some other work for the entire remedy of the site as part of our cost share. So we knew that this would happen eventually. It's just kind of a matter of being ready to implement the remedy, gathering enough data to actually be confident in where the boundaries were. We did a lot of investigation work in 2018, and that report was finalized in 2019. That really refined the boundaries of the plume and allow us to draw this area with more confidence, because it had been a few years before, or been a few years until, we were back out there and collected new data.
And I don't think my next question actually makes any substantive difference, but just out of curiosity, I mean, the plume, we knew where it was in the 80s, in the 90s. We didn't know the extent of it perhaps, but even the areas where we did know, there was no need to reclassify this as class 4 groundwater back then. Or there was, so we just figured, the town put town water in the 1980s because of this, so nobody's been drilling and using well water anyway. So again, maybe it's an academic question, but I just...
Yeah, and I think, the intent is really to be protective in the future, so when properties change hands and the people working on the site now or town officials change over the years, people may have less familiarity with the site, whereas people now are aware of what's going on. And I think that happens with a lot of the sites that we manage is, we know there's going to be restrictions put on a site eventually, but it kind of waits to a point where we have a final cleanup plan and enough data to make that happen.
Okay. And then just two other questions. You said it gets tested every 5 years. Is that right? It's
that's a requirement in the ROD. So part of the remedy, aside from actually targeting the very contaminated areas, would be to develop a monitoring program. So some areas that aren't specifically targeted for active remediation, there's monitored natural attenuation that will occur. So we're just monitoring every so often and making sure the plume isn't expanding. There's always an opportunity to refine these boundaries if we see any changes, either to expand or even reduce the area that's restricted over time. But that's kind of a standard time frame for review. Okay,
and scientifically that's okay. This is a really stupid analogy, so I'm saying that up front. Colonoscopies, they say after you're over a certain age and if you have a family history, then it's every 5 years or every 10 years or things like that. And I guess the reason is because polyps don't turn cancerous within that certain number of years anyway. So you can wait that long between exams. Is this plume, the science behind it, similar to that, where you can test where it is every couple of years because if it is expanding, it's not going to expand that much faster than science allows?
So there is more frequent monitoring planned for the areas that have those higher areas of contamination and where the treatment is occurring. So I think, if we see that the treatment is occurring and we see those contaminant levels reduce in the areas that we're targeting, we know that source isn't constantly dosing the rest of the plume, and we would expect, the perimeter of the plume to also decrease over time. And and not continue to expand as much. But I think, you know, the data that we've. Oh, okay. I mean, so monitoring in general.
She's allowed to talk.
Can be adjusted, but in general, EPA requires 5-year reviews for any Superfund site. So I think just this week they're up to reevaluate the MyTech facility because it's been 5 years since the soil remedy was completed. So that's kind of a standard time frame, but I think, you know, based on the data we see, other monitoring at the site can be adjusted based on the data. I don't know if you want to add anything.
There's frequent monitoring for the areas where there's contamination, and the 5-year review is separate
Okay.
from that part of it. And that's just EPA policy, and they did it on the superintendent's.
Thank you. And actually, this last part is maybe more for Eric and maybe Matt, but is there something the town should do with our zoning regulations to make it so that, and again, this is area of town, it's not like people are out there digging wells and putting septic systems in anyway. But should we have something in our zoning regs that say that you can't do that?
Yeah, we did, in the bylaw amendment last year, there was some language related to notification and digging. I should have pulled it up before the meeting, but this was addressed with that amendment to some degree, and the board looked at an initial groundwater ordinance a couple of years ago, and one of the things we were waiting for was the map to be determined by DEC for the reclassification, and then by reference in the ordinance. So I anticipate once this process is complete, the board can revisit that ordinance as well, using this as a delineation tool in that policy.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
Any other questions from board members? Is there any questions from people who are watching on Zoom?
Possible. I think there's one person in the audience. I'm not seeing any questions or hands raised. I'll see Kevin from the EPA was listening in on the call too. If I don't think he has a presentation or anything, but if the board had any questions for him, I could connect him as well.
There used to be some indoor air quality testing done in particular homes. Is that still being done?
There was one home that was part of the remedy. There was basically a sump that was running in one home constantly and causing a vapor issue in that particular home. And that residents, there's been some work done on there to fill in the basement so that a sump is no longer needed. Basically turn the basement into a crawl space and put in a vapor barrier and basically a passive radon fan. And so the vapor issue there has been mitigated. And I don't believe any other issues were found at any other homes. There was one other many years back that was addressed, but not more recent.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? Hey, remember, problem with having history. There was a good friend of mine who had a home on South Bernal Road that was affected by the plume. He had a driven point in his basement for drinking water. He made wonderful wine, so I'm not sure if it was because of the chemicals or not. Anyway, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay.
No other comments or presentations.
So we'll move on then to the fiscal year 2021 draft single audit report. And Eric will lead off, and Shirley will do the main part of the job here.
Yep, I'll surely drive this one for the most part, but for the board, this is a fiscal year 2021 single audit as we exceeded the federal thresholds for receiving pass-through money that originated with the federal government. It's a fiscal year 2021, so it's a little bit delayed, and this is due to some extensions granted by the federal government. I believe, Shirley, it was COVID effect to allow a little more time for this. So our auditing firm, Sullivan Powers, completed this for us. The board has it in draft format with your materials this evening. Finance Director Shirley Goodell-Lackey will walk through it. I'll start with the good news, and there's no bad news, so. The good news is there's no findings in this, so always great to see a clean audit report for the town. For the board's consideration after hearing this presentation, it's a draft right now. It's your audit report, so you'd be asked to consider approving this should you want to proceed with accepting and approving the audit. So I'll turn it over to Shirley.
Well, you stole my thunder.
I shouldn't have. Suspense here.
So I'm going to start back just about the purpose, because I know a couple people here are new and probably haven't seen a single audit before, but so a single audit is when an independent auditor audits the grantee's financial management process, including compliance with federal grant requirements. The Office of Management and Budget is responsible for the uniform guidance, which sets the scope for when an entity needs a single audit, and currently that scope is federal awards greater than $750,000. And they also compile the compliance supplement, and that is a document that the auditors use that give them or provides the audit program for the different types of federal awards. So basically, here's what we want you to test, and then they test it. So I'm going to expand maybe a little bit on what Eric was just referring to. So typically, we would have this audit done and approved sometime going forward prior to March. The actual deadline is March 31st. After this is approved, there's something called the Federal Clearinghouse. So this report is submitted onto the Clearinghouse. It's a website. The auditors do part of it, and I do part of it. So normally we have that done by or before March 31st, but because of the volume of new federal grant funds under the Coronavirus Relief Fund, the Office of Management and Budget needed time to update the compliance supplement to come up with the compliance steps that needed to be done over all this money. So the extension is till 9/30 of '22 to file the FY21 single audit. So I'm going to turn to the second page, and you say, oh, wow, look at this big index, and like all these pages aren't here. So Sullivan and Powers just didn't put the financial statement, but the true complete single audit is first the audited financial statements, and then it goes on to include the special reports for the single audit. So lots of pages in the index, you just don't have them because you've seen it already. When we do file it on the Clearinghouse website, it is an 84-page document. I'm skipping by the independent auditor's report because that's what you've already seen in the audit. And I'm going to jump over to the page that says Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, and that we refer to as the CFA. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this form just to help you understand it. So if you look at the very first line item, it says U.S. Department of Agriculture. So each of those categories is the federal awarding agency, so that's where our funds are coming from. The next line, in this case, says pass through the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. So that's the state pass-through. The majority of our money is state pass-through money that comes from the Fed to the state. And then the third line there tells you what the actual program name was. So all of that is spelled out in the grant agreement. So the federal assistance listing, just in case you are familiar, the old terminology used to be the CFDA, which was the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance. They've just changed the name of that. Most of the codes remain the same. They just changed the name. So the column that says pass through to subrecipient, that is if we received money and then we had a subrecipient award or agreement that passed it on to somebody else. We do not have any of that in this audit. Well, I'm sorry, we do have the $100,000 that was from the Old North End Community Center. That is essentially, it's community block grant money that has to come through a municipality to go to a nonprofit. So we were the pass-through agency there. In the second line item, which is the U.S. Department of the Interior, the program was Outdoor Recreation Acquisition, Development, and Planning. So that, for those of you who were here, that was a grant that was awarded, well, let me go backwards. So the town purchased the Catamount Community Forest in March of 2019. And you're saying, ooh, okay, that was 2 audits ago. But the grant award really lagged. When the pandemic hit, it affected a lot of other things. So this award agreement was actually drawn up, and the period of performance began in July of 20. So even though we previously spent the money, and you say, okay, that doesn't make any sense because it's a schedule of expenditure of federal awards, we didn't expend that $280,000 in FY21. But in this case, because the grant agreement was written in FY21, we are including it in this report. And the same is true of a lot of the coronavirus relief fund money. I'm going to skip to the third page of this. You'll see just some prior year expenditures. So those little notes talk about the different grants that we got. That money was actually in a previous year in FY19 or FY20 in this case, but because of the date that we got the actual grant agreements, it has to be included in this report. So a little unusual, but that actually that's the first time I've actually had that happen in an audit. But the $280,000 grant for the purchase of the Catamount Community Forest and all the coronavirus relief money, those were the 2 programs that the auditors audited. I'm gonna turn a page and then I'll come back and talk a little bit more. But the next report is the report under internal control over financial reporting and compliance and other matters based on the audit of financial statements. So what this is I'm going to the second paragraph and to summarize that. In planning and performing our audit over internal control, they are looking to express opinion on the financial statements, but not really on the operation of our internal controls. So the auditor's opinion on the next page is essentially saying, given these limitations during our audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be a material weakness. So good news. So in summary, those are the 2 important points in that particular document. The rest of it is all required language. So the next report, the independent auditor's report on compliance over each major program on internal control under the compliance supplement. So the first paragraph, again, is just referring to the compliance supplement, which they are required to follow when they're doing testing over the programs. And and a lot of it talks about the different kind of deficiencies in internal controls that they're required to explain to you, what the definitions of. So I've skipped down to the second to the last paragraph. In the end, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control over compliance that we consider to be material weaknesses. So all good. The next page, summary schedule of prior audit findings and deficiencies. We didn't have anything, so there's no single audit in the prior year. But we will continue to have single audits for the next few years, definitely FY22 and FY23, and I imagine into 24, and it depends how long we make our ARPA money last. I'm skipping down. So they have the financial summary of auditors' results for the financial statements and federal awards. And I don't want to repeat something you've already read, but essentially everything they looked at said, okay, we didn't note any material weaknesses, we didn't identify any lack of internal control, and the auditor's report issue unmodified essentially means it's a clean opinion. And then there are no audit findings that are required to be reported in accordance with 2 CFR 200.516A. That is referring to the uniform guidance as well. So the 2, and here they're just talking about the 2 major programs that they audited, which I chatted about already. At the very bottom, and our threshold, as I said, was $750,000. And the very last line says the auditee did not qualify as a low-risk auditee. And you say, ooh, that's bad news. But what all that really means is because we haven't had prior single audits, we automatically will not qualify as a low-risk auditee. So with those two grants, they actually audited 56% of our federal expenditures. And there's this whole graph that they have to use to calculate how much of our federal dollars, and the auditors go through that calculation. And with a low-risk auditee, the auditor may select, so this is the difference, the auditor may select as many major programs as necessary to encompass 20% of the total federal awards expended, versus they audited 56% of ours just with those two programs. So, unless you have questions, that's it for me.
Are there questions for Shirley? Great job. Don't hear any questions? Good, thanks for the explanation.
Well, good. You're welcome. Well, tomorrow we'll have the filing done with the clearinghouse, so it will be done.
Great, so now I'm looking for a motion.
Move to accept and finalize the single audit report for fiscal year 2021.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good, thank you. Thank you again, Shirley.
Thank you.
Moving on to Community Center Scoping Library Assessment Project and the project update from Eric.
So we're currently reviewing RFQ proposals for the project. We had 4 submitted, and I have a staff committee reviewing them. I hope to have a contract award here in the next couple of weeks. And reminder for folks listening, this project will evaluate different space alternatives for the select board and library trustees to consider selecting a preferred alternative for a facility project in the coming years. And this study really has an emphasis on community engagement to gather feedback on what types of programmatic elements in these facilities the community is looking for. It's funded using ARPA dollars in the FY23 budget. There's been $60,000 designated to date. And as we get into reviewing these proposals and looking at the project scope, staff's anticipating additional funding may be warranted for this project to deliver the depth of analysis and engagement envisioned as the award decision is made for a contract here with an architectural firm. Before the select board is tonight to consider an additional allocation of ARPA funds of up to $40,000 for this project. Manager would then utilize the additional allocation in making a final decision on the contract for the project and its scope. And then also, as part of my update, we're accepting applications for 4 community members to serve on the steering committee. I believe we have 4 or 5 submitted so far, so I'm going to bring that to the select board in October to interview those candidates and consider appointments. Then the select board will have to decide who it would like to serve on the committee as well. There's also be a member of the library trustees in the Recreation and Parks Committee. So hopefully we could get this project started in November, I'm anticipating, at least to start some research for the architectural firm, some kind of forming of the committee, and then really pick up things after the holidays. And I think it would go into next spring a bit, especially with the outreach components. So, I'll have a better sense once we have a contractor on board and kind of their vision for the trajectory. But things are coming together, so that's good. So.
Good. So questions or comments regarding the request? Then there is a motion suggested.
I'll move to allocate up to $40,000 of additional ARPA funds to be used for the community center scoping and library assessment project.
Is there a second?
Second. Greta, were you?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that $40,000 was going to be enough additional,
With reviewing the proposals, I believe that'll put us in a good range, and we should be able to find a scope that falls in that range that's appropriate for the project. So okay. I tried to build in a round number with a little bit of a buffer, but I'll say I'm fairly confident that should be good for us. So.
Good.
Thank you.
Other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So we have done that. We're moving on to property tax sale update. Eric again.
So to update the board where we left this last July, the town attorney's begun assisting staff with the property tax sale process for delinquent accounts. This first phase was letters to delinquent accounts from the town attorney's office, and As a result of that, a few accounts have become current due to those letters, so that's good news. There remain 7 properties with delinquent taxes that have not responded to letters from the town or the town attorney that have been identified as for a tax sale, wearing my role as delinquent tax collector. The next step would be for the delinquent tax collector to proceed to a tax sale of these properties. Given the lead time for conducting a property tax sale and what it involves, with speaking with our attorney's office, my plan would be to hold it in early spring of 2023. This would avoid, the board may recall, there's a redemption period if a property does go to tax sale, for the property owner to pay off the delinquent taxes plus interest that accrues. And I'd like to avoid that period falling within the winter months, so that would be the reason for a little bit of a lag here to the start of the new year. The reminder, the properties that are proceeding to a tax sale, they can pay the delinquent taxes at any time leading up to that tax sale date. This would also need to pay any fees incurred by the town to date for that process, primarily legal fees and the advertising that occurred. The board amended the town's policy for collection and payment of delinquent taxes earlier this year as we looked at this process. The policy states the delinquent tax collector may proceed to a tax sale of properties that have not paid past due balance in full by the deadline in a tax sale notice letter that was sent out by the town attorney. My plan right now is to proceed with the tax sale, starting that legal process in January with a spring tax sale date, unless directed otherwise by the select board.
Questions for Eric? A lot of work ahead for you.
And I know certainly for the community, there's opportunity to still pay these accounts, but it's a process and statute as we work to make these accounts current for the town. So we'll continue the process.
Good, thank you. And we're on to the vast agreement for winter of 2022 and 23. And there's a memo to Eric from Simon Miles that describes the proposal.
Yep, and this is something the board sees every year. It's an agreement with our snowmobile club in town, the Williston Hillhawks, to use public lands for trails. These are that cross town-owned lands. Select Board in the past has approved the use subject to conditions suggested by the Conservation Commission and the Public Works Department. Both of those entities reviewed the agreement. They have no suggested changes for this year. They find it acceptable. So really, before you this evening is the same agreement as last year with no suggested changes by staff to consider.
Any questions for Eric? It's nice to have something that continues on for pretty much year after year with not much change.
Yeah.
So there's a motion suggested.
I'll move to approve the use of public land by the Williston Hillhawks and the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, and to authorize the town manager to sign the agreement for the 2022 to 2023 season.
Is there a second? Is there any discussion on the motion?
Just that they used to come in. I say that every year.
What?
They used to come in
Yeah,
person.
Yes, yes, they did.
There's no reason for them to. I miss them, that's all.
Have a select board meeting on a snow machine trail.
That's an idea.
I can represent them.
Oh, that's right, Shirley's a member.
Okay, all right. Tell them we miss
Me
them.
too, Shirley.
Thank you for your presence.
We have a motion made and seconded. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Now we're moving right up to the manager's report.
And I distributed prior to the meeting and at your seats, but we have the first finance report of FY23, so
Yes.
I'll ask Shirley to walk the board through. She's prepared.
So apologies for the very last minute preparation of these, but even though we book all the property taxes in July, when bills go out, it means all of the property taxes get booked to our revenue, which includes everything that goes to the state and everything that goes to the school district. So we have to wait for the state to produce the cash flow. which I just got late yesterday afternoon. So I was hoping to have them done this weekend, but the timing just didn't work out. So I'm going to just talk about the major line items like property taxes. That's really what I just said to you. It looks like we're not going to quite hit budget, but what happens every year is when the state sends that cash flow report, the preliminary one, when the final one comes in May, so what I do is we book this $34 million of property taxes. I get the cash flow and I move everything out of tax revenue that the state is telling me is going to be paid to them or the school district. When the final cash flow comes in May, that number is typically less that we owe to the state, so that I'll make an adjustment to increase property taxes and reduce our liability to the state. So I do anticipate we'll be right on budget for that one. Penalty, interest, and other tax, the majority of that, 85,000 of that, or I'm sorry, 82,000 of that is the pilot or pilots billing that we do. So we send a invoice to the state of Vermont for the 2 rest areas, and they pay us pilot. And the other majority of that is to the Chittenden Solid Waste District and to Casella for their operations. They pay us pilos for their land. So those have been 100% billed in this year. Compared to last year, it was really late. I didn't get to it till February, and then Mary billed it. So that's why that looks so high at 48%, because, and the other 10,000 of that $95,000 number is interest on property taxes just for July and August. Let's see, just skimming down through here. Ambulance revenue looks like, ooh, wow, we haven't done anything because it's only 5% of budget. But under the accounting rules, I get to look at the July and August reports that we get from the city of Barre, who does our accounting for us, and any payments in July and August that relate to prior year activity, we can pull back into the last year. So this truly only represents cash received on services for July and August of this year. So that's why it looks low. And at the end of the year, it'll look back in line once I pull back in July and August of 23 into June of 23. Let's see. Recreation revenue is at 59%. The reason for that is that the day camps themselves, 6 out of the 8 weeks of the camps for the summer already happened. So most of that revenue is booked. And then enrichment camps, or contracted camps as we call them, we had 16 camps this summer in this fiscal year. So the number of camps increased and the number of students increased. So that's a big share of the revenue is already booked within the summer months. Let's see. I know I have my notes here, but I can just remember most of the things just by looking at this. Host town fees looks low, but that is just one payment for Casella for the material processed at their transfer station. So we get a fee based on tonnage that goes through the transfer station, and Eric and I are in the process of working on a new agreement for this year. Expenditures. I'm going to pick on the select board because they're already at 49%, but again, that's just the CCTV contract of $12,600 that's paid in July of every year. Let's see. I could just look at the front. Regional social services and health, 31% of the budget, because we have, I'm going to cheat and look at my notes, the Winooski Park District. Who else is in there? Winooski Park District, the CCRPC, and VLCT. We pay 100% of their fee annually in July, so that's already there. Transportation, the biggest share of that is we pay approximately $214,000 to CCTA. So that's paid in 3 installments over a year, so $71,400's already been paid, so that's a third of the year already paid on that particular line item. And parks and recs at 25%, that just corresponds to the increase in revenue, so their expenses are more in the early part of the year. The only expense we don't have recorded for that is the invoice from the school district to pay for the facility charges for the summer, or I should say from July 1st. And that, so I just want to talk about one line. So down at the bottom, I put in this unallocated insurances, and I'm like, what is that? So that's not a budget item. It'll disappear in September. So when we pay the league for all of our insurances, workman's comp, our regular property and liability, whenever we're getting unemployment, they just get charged to the general fund, and we stick them in an account, and then I have to allocate them out. Well, until I was doing this, I realized I hadn't allocated out July. So it'll be gone in September, and it gets allocated to across all the departments in the general fund, plus the 3 utilities. So let's see. User charges for water, sewer, and stormwater, they all look low if you consider we're 17% through the year, but this is the same issue that the bill goes from May 15th to August 15th, so 1.5 months goes back into FY22, and then 1.5 months is in FY23. So that's only a month and a half of billings. In other revenue, both for water and sewer, the majority of that is hook-on fees. So I was looking at it compared to last year, and most of our revenue from that comes in like December to June timeframe, and we're just seeing that same pattern this year. Let's see. Outside services, again, for all 3 entities is audit. I'm going to cheat and look at this one because I don't remember them all. Audit fees, legal, engineer fees, and insurance payments, and that's where that allocation comes in, because nothing's been allocated to them. The first quarterly payment hasn't been allocated, so it looks low now, but once I allocate in September, 1/4 of the year will be charged there. Let's see. I'm going to look at sewer for a minute. So treatment and other, we have $870,000, but no expenses in the first 2 months. That's invoiced quarterly, and the first invoice came in September for $213,000, so that's been paid. Additional capacity purchase, I have to look at that one because usually Essex invoices us early on in July every year, but we did have that hiatus last year, so I'll reach out to them and get a billing for them for that additional capacity that we've agreed to. The treatment plant upgrade debt, that's a one-time payment. That's in October, so once October hits, that'll pretty much meet budget. Public Works building rent, again, on all 3 entities, is just a charge from the Highway Department and the General Fund back to the 3 utilities, and I'll do that next month and take care of that. And pump station debt is payable October, March, and June, so there just haven't been any debt payments yet. Let's see. So now I'm going to skip over to the back and talk about the Stormwater Fund. We talked about revenue already with water and sewer. Project labor and within maintenance operation is project equipment use. Those are the charges that are coming from the Highway Department for the projects they do for stormwater, and I just get a report of that activity quarterly from Bruce, and it gets booked quarterly, so hence there's no year-to-date activity. And capital expenditures, if you're looking compared to water and sewer, you say, ooh, all the capital expenditures actually equals budget. And the reason is for water and sewer, we actually have separate funds that we put the capital funding into, so really physically we transfer money at the bank, and so it is maintained in those accounts, and we keep track of the balance by project. For the stormwater fund, I decided not to do that. I just do it within the general ledger instead of setting up another fund, and the auditors actually sort of would rather you not have more cash accounts. So one cash account, and I just maintain that on the GL. So you'll only see capital expenditures. in this when we spend, but on the GL, in regards to cash, I do keep track of the balances that have been approved each year and the spending against those. So that one's a little bit different. And that's it for me.
Questions for Shirley? Very thorough, so,
Yeah.
very good.
Okay,
Thanks.
you are welcome.
Thank you.
And more on the manager's report.
Couple more updates for the board briefly here. Our Energy Committee is going to be putting on a community electric vehicle event on October 1st over at Allenbrook School. Got to double check the time. I think it's in the afternoon that day, but it sounds like it's shaping up to be a really good event with a number of EV owners in town, bringing their vehicles, having a question and answer. I think we'll have an e-bike demo as part of this as well, so it's going to be a good event but from the committee putting on here. Also looking to set a date for our select board retreat for the DEI training from Abundant Sun. Thanks for pointing it out, Terry and Greta, that the 8th is election day, so we'll cross that one off the list here. So the 29th of November is the 5th Tuesday. We can also look at other potential dates if that date's not good for the board here.
Anybody have problems with the 29th? Okay. We'll figure out a time, either 6 or 6:30.
Yeah, it sounded like one of their, well, one person in the room, then a colleague may be joining us remotely. I think they work over in the UK, so trying to make sure it's not too late on their end. So they said
Yes.
6 or 6:30 would be helpful, and
Okay.
so we can look at that. I'll let them know to mark that off. Now, I sent the board a note today on North Williston Road. The sinkhole issue there is revealed that there's a stormwater pipe that crosses under the road that has failed. So we're going to have to fix this. To do so, we're going to have to close the road for a couple days. There'll be a detour that will be set up probably to Old Stage Road. We're hoping we'll get a contractor on board to do this. We ordered the pipe today that we need, but Bruce is watching this very carefully. He told me if the condition changes at all for the worse, we'll need to close the road immediately to prevent any further damage. So we're hoping we'll have lead time in the community on this to prepare for the detour, but if traffic seems a little wonky around the village, suddenly that's probably what's going on. So I think it's 1 to 2 days once we can get a contractor on site, so hopefully this is resolved fairly quickly.
Any idea of whereabouts on North Williston Road?
It is just south of the Four Corners with Mountain View and Governor Chittenden Road, 1 or 2 houses down from there.
Oh, okay.
So, I guess a sinkhole opened up just off to the side, and you could see some utility lines exposed. Then further investigation found it was the stormwater pipe that goes under the road. So we'll get that one fixed here. Then I had good news right before the meeting. I had a letter from VLCT that Williston's been accepted to the Welcoming Engaging Communities cohort. So it was good news that our community was selected. I'll share a letter with the full board, and Greta and Jeff, they invited both of you if you wanted to attend the VLCT Town Fair, and they still haven't figured out exactly when the cohort's going to meet, so they might discuss that more during that meeting, but I'll pass it on to you and Jeff and see what your schedules look like.
Okay.
It was good news to be accepted into that group.
Good.
And let's see, that's all I have for manager's report this
Okay.
evening.
Moving on to other business, we do have at least 2 things to take care of, and one's the catering permit for 24th of September at the Isham Farm. Any other things on that we need to talk about?
The catering permit, like Terry shared, is at Isham's. It's coming up this Saturday, the 24th. It's Southern Smoke Foods LLC. We have this new online form system from the clerk's office gets these. It's staff has no concerns with this at the site. We rarely host weddings there with DRB approval.
You're looking for a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion of the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, we need to appoint or elect a delegate to the town fair, the other meetings that are taking place there. And Eric has been our delegate in the past, and recommend that he be again Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any other business we need to take care of tonight before we go into executive session? Hearing none, then I'm looking for a motion to go into executive session.
Move that we enter executive session to conduct the annual evaluation of the town manager under the provision of Title I, Sections 3133 of the Vermont statutes, and invite town manager Eric Wells to join.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? So we're on executive session. I think our easiest way to do this is go downstairs and as we